Jon Jones is absolutely positively the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, probably the greatest fighter of all time in any sport.
According to Dana White, Jon Jones runs through the whole UFC and beats up everybody. Many, like Dana, consider Jones the greatest fighter in the UFC, and I mean, who can blame them? Jones is like the boogeyman of the UFC. From his UFC debut at age 21 to a 37-year-old beating up Stipe Miocic, Jones has remained one of the most dangerous men to face in the octagon. But what if I told you there's a man who hands down beats up Jones? Yes, his name is Georges St-Pierre.
Georges St-Pierre. He's a very strong guy, very physically strong, powerful.
And if you're a true UFC fan, you know where I'm going with this. St-Pierre is easily one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC. Throughout his entire career of 28 fights, St-Pierre only lost twice, and boy did he avenge those losses. Jones is a beast and his legacy speaks for itself, but when you really break it down, GSP is just a level above, even against someone as dominant as Jones. Let's start with the obvious. GSP's fight IQ is insane. The guy doesn't just fight on instinct or raw talent, he's a master tactician. Every single fight of his is like watching a professor conduct a class on how to dominate opponents. Jones is a smart fighter too, I'll give him that, but GSP's ability to adapt mid-fight is something else. If Jones came in with his flashy striking and unorthodox style, GSP would already have an answer for it. And then there's the wrestling. Let's not sugarcoat it, GSP's wrestling is legendary.
Oh! GSP drops Bisping!
The zone is head kick! It's big time hurt!
With the elbows, and it's over!
He doesn't just take people down, he makes elite wrestlers, actual champions in their own right, look like amateurs. Remember when he out-wrestled Josh Koscheck? Or how he made Matt Hughes, one of the best wrestlers of his era, look clueless. And then you might be thinking, if this guy can beat Jones, why did he lose to a frigging Matt Serra? So let's talk about GSP's two losses, and why there are reasons to give him a bit of a pass for both of them. First, the loss to Matt Hughes at UFC 46 was early in GSP's career.
Matt Hughes with a submission, and it's all over! It's all over! Matt Hughes with a submission victory!
And it was a huge learning moment for him. He was up and coming, and though he had some impressive skills, he wasn't quite the complete fighter yet. Hughes at that time was already one of the top dogs in the welterweight division with a killer ground game and solid wrestling. Plus, GSP got caught in a submission early on that he didn't see coming. It was a tough loss, but really it was a case of GSP not being fully prepared for the nuances of Hughes' game. He learned from that though and came back even stronger, going on to dominate the welterweight division. Then there's the second loss to Matt Serra at UFC 69. Now this is probably the one people talk about more, but there's a solid reason behind it too. GSP was on top of the world at that point, and many felt he was unbeatable. But when he fought Serra, it was a case of being too complacent. GSP wasn't mentally in the right place, and Serra, a massive underdog, caught him with a clean punch early in the fight. The shot rocked GSP, and after that, Serra was able to control him and win the fight. But here's the thing, GSP had the talent and skills to beat him on any given day. It just wasn't his night, and it was one of those rare moments where you have the better fighter losing because of every other factor besides skill levels. You see, GSP didn't just sit back and accept those losses, and the way he avenged them is honestly a big part of why he's regarded as one of the greatest. First, let's talk about Matt Hughes. After that loss at UFC 46, GSP really leveled up. He worked on his wrestling, improved his ground game, and just got a lot more well-rounded. So when GSP finally got that rematch with Hughes at UFC 65, he was a completely different beast, dominating Hughes from start to finish.
Power, Matt Hughes.
Oh, Superman punch caught him! Hughes is down goes Hughes with the LPR! Is the new welterweight champion!
He made it look so easy with that brutal TKO in the second round. Now, when it comes to Matt Serra, that loss must have stung, and for GSP to get caught like that was wild. But he took his time, did his homework, and made sure he wasn't going to let that happen again. So when they fought in the rematch at UFC 83, GSP outclassed Serra in every way. Both times, GSP didn't just avenge his losses, he completely erased them from people's minds. Now, cardio. This is where GSP would really shine. Have you ever seen him gas out? Like ever? Even in 5-round wars, he's still bouncing on his feet, ready to go. Jones has had moments where he looked a little winded, especially when fights drag on, but GSP, the man's cardio is ridiculous. He's a machine and he sets a pace that most fighters just can't keep up with. If this fight went into the later rounds, Jones would be struggling to match GSP's energy, while GSP would still be firing on all cylinders. So think back to Jon Jones's first fight with Alexander Gustafsson. That was the fight that really started to chip away at that invincible aura Jones had built around himself. Before that, it felt like Jones could do no wrong, right? He was beating everyone in the most dominant way possible, and there wasn't much doubt that he was the best in the division.
Vicious elbow. 30 seconds left in the round.
But then Gustafsson came in and pushed him harder than anyone had before. Jones got the decision, sure.
The undisputed UFC
light heavyweight champion of the world, Jon.
But it was clear that he wasn't this untouchable force anymore. Then, fast forward to 2020, and Jones has that fight with Dominic Reyes. This one was even crazier. Reyes, a fighter with barely any marquee names on his resume, came in and straight up outstruck Jones. He was landing cleaner, more significant shots, and he took the fight the full 5 rounds. But when the fight went to the judges, they still gave the win to Jones. And that's where things get even more interesting, because if you watch the fight, it's hard to say that Jones did enough to win, especially given how dominant he looked in the past. What this shows is that Jones is human. If someone like Georges St-Pierre, who's a master of mixing up his game, could get a hold of Jones, he could expose some of his weaknesses. And let's not forget about mentality. GSP is one of the most mentally tough fighters in MMA history. He's been through everything: devastating losses, long layoffs, and the pressure of being a champion for years. And he's come out stronger every time. Remember when he stepped into the cage with Michael Bisping at UFC 217 for the middleweight title? Bisping at the time was an absolute beast. He had just knocked out Luke Rockhold to claim the title, and he was coming off a defense against Dan Henderson. People were writing GSP off, thinking he was too old, too rusty, too out of shape to hang with a guy like Bisping. But man, GSP came out like he was on a mission. He looked smooth and composed, not showing any signs of ring rust. He took Bisping down and worked his way into a position where he could sink in that rear naked choke.
It's over, Joe! It's over, Joe! It's over!
Georges St-Pierre has done it!
And just like that, in typical GSP fashion, he submitted Bisping and took the middleweight title.
Undisputed UFC middleweight champion of the world, George
Jones, as talented as he is, he's had his fair share of distractions, controversies, and personal struggles. You never know which version of Jon Jones is going to show up. GSP, on the other hand, is always locked in. He's the guy who thrives on challenges, who rises to the occasion when it matters most. Speaking of Jones's most recent win against Stipe Miocic, the thing is, that fight didn't really do much to add to Jones's legendary status. Miocic is an all-time great, no doubt, but let's be real, he was coming into that fight pretty faded. He was on the older side and had already taken some heavy losses before, especially that brutal knockout loss to Francis Ngannou. It wasn't the same Miocic who had dominated the heavyweight division before, and Jones, well, he got the win, sure.
the undisputed UFC heavyweight champion of the world.
But it wasn't like he put on some spectacular performance that made everyone say, wow, this guy's untouchable. It was a win, but it didn't do anything to remind us why Jones is so special. It felt more like Jones was playing it safe, not taking the same risks he used to.
Now he's going for Kimura. It's all over!
It was more of a cautious victory rather than a statement win that would really push his status to the next level. It's a bittersweet pill to swallow, but the dream matchup between Georges St-Pierre and Jon Jones is one that will likely remain just that, a dream. Jones is at the tail end of his legendary career with only a few fights left before he hangs up the gloves for good. And if Dana White's words are anything to go by, the final chapter of Jones's career seems to be set. White has all but confirmed that when Jones steps into the octagon next, it will be against the UK's Tom Aspinall, a fight that's already generating massive buzz.
So I get asked this every year, and this year, it would be Aspinall Jones.
Aspinall is young, hungry, and dangerous, making him the perfect foil for Jones's swan song.
On the flip side, Georges St-Pierre is firmly retired and has shown no signs of itching to make a comeback. He left the sport on his own terms as one of the greatest to ever do it, and he seems content with his legacy. Sure, GSP has teased the idea of returning in the past, but nothing concrete has ever come of it. And at this point, with Jones nearing the end of his run and GSP enjoying life outside the cage, the stars just aren't aligning for this super fight to happen.